Go. Excellent. Okay, let's play a game. It's called What's the Jingle? Now, there is a jingle that I think many of you will be familiar with, and it's probably the product comes from around about the 1920s. I know none of you were around then, but it's a popular product. And there is a TV ad with a girl swinging on a swing, and she sings, come on Pam, what does she sing? No, not on the swing. How's it go? You know the jingle. Plain jelly, plain jelly for me. I like it for tea. A little each day is a good recipe. Excellent. Now we've got it. You know how the game goes. Okay, so let's get that's it. I like aeroplane jelly. You got that right. That's 2 points for Pam. So the next one is around about the same era. I think it's the 1930s it emerged. And there's a TV ad. And the one that goes right back is these kids marching on the spot, singing with little rosy cheeks. What are they singing, Pam? We're happy little Vegemites. We all enjoy our Vegemite for breakfast, lunch and tea. Our mummies say we're growing stronger every single week because we love our Vegemite. We all enjoy our Vegemite. It puts a rose on every cheek. Right, we're getting it now. Next slide. That's it. That's the one. Okay. Now the next one is more from my era. I'm an 80s kid. And it's kids who are marching down the aisle of an orchard and they're singing about their dad. How does it go? Picks the fruit that goes to Cotties, makes the cordial. Oh, I like best. You see how these jingles are getting shorter and shorter? Because my kids, let's get that one up. My kids really love the go-amos, because they don't have to remember very many words. And it drives me insane because they do it in the back of the car as we drive past an OTR. So these jingles are designed to get into your head. And if you go home via the shops and you end up with a bottle of Cotties cordial and a packet of aeroplane jelly and a jar of Vegemite, don't blame me. It's because the marketing campaign worked, that the jingle got in your head, because what we remember is that these products are good for us. Our mummies approve of it. We have it for breakfast, lunch and tea. It puts a rose on our cheek. These are things that tell us what's good for us and what we need to remember about how to enjoy life. That's what they're trying to do. And so these jingles get in our head, and the marketing strategy is to make us remember, to dominate our subconscious in such a way that this important message doesn't leave our minds. And it's important to them because this is the simple creed that they have created to make sure that we remember what's important. Let's go to the next slide. What's our jingle? As people of Christ, what is our jingle? The Apostle Paul says to the 1 Corinthian church, I now pass on to you as of first importance what you need to receive. So I'm going to pass it on to you now. If the Apostle Paul is pleading with the church to remember this original jingle that he gave them, the reason for this is because they've been distracted by other jingles, as we have been this morning. We're all going to go away from here and remember Cotties cordial and aeroplane jelly, but are we going to remember what Paul's trying to tell us? It's so easy to be distracted by these because they are the narratives and the habits that become permissible outside the church, for the Corinthian church in particular. And remember the original jingle, he says, because this is the one on which you make your stand and by which you have been saved. This one brought you life. This jingle, if you remember it, it reorients all your priorities towards a hope that is not of this world. He's warning them not to forget, because for the most of his letter, he's addressing this terrible division, this competition, inequity, talking about Christians taking lawsuits out against each other, about marriage and problems within marriage, about sexual immorality. And then he goes on to talk about the things in the last few chapters. As we get up to chapter 15, he's talking about the importance of love for one another. He's talking about something else where he says, I receive what I now pass on to you, that when you eat together, do it together. Don't forget that when we gather around the Lord's table and we remember Jesus together, that we don't leave each other out. Don't compete for the spiritual gifts. These are all the things that Paul is saying to them throughout the whole letter. And so he gets to this point where he says, let me remind you of the very basic creed. And here is the jingle I want you to get stuck in your head. Christ lived, Christ died. On the third day he rose again, and because of this we live. Very simple jingle that you can remember. I love how Paul offers this very simple, effective and direct message to reorient the church and to remind them that this message about Jesus is in fact where we place our hope and trust, not in any other marketable product. Here is what I receive, what I pass on to you. And I want you to remember this. You have received a message. Now you have a responsibility to pass it on. Let's go to the next slide. There's this story that you heard this morning of some fishermen who had been out all night fishing, and Jesus is on the shore preaching to a group of people, and he says to Simon Peter, can I get into your boat? I don't think he even asks. He gets into the boat and he preaches to the people. The crowd's growing. And then he says to Simon Peter, who's washing out his nets, hey, why don't you push out into the deep a little bit more? And we'll go and put our nets in the ocean again. And Peter experienced this miraculous activity of God that he has no control over, where they have this miraculous catch of fish, and then he's asked to drop everything and go and follow Jesus. I think we all have boats, metaphorically, boats that God is asking us to push out into the deep, uncomfortable places. The places where maybe we don't feel like going or where we don't want to go. Well, for Verity and I, my wife Verity, we felt a strong and deep calling to push our boat out into the deep at a time when we were not allowed to talk with our neighbours in our house, which is something that is kind of common for us. And do you remember that time? I know it was a long time ago now, 5 years ago. We were all locked in our homes. We weren't allowed to go out. We weren't allowed to interact with people. These COVID times put challenges in front of all of us. And so the boat that we pushed out was our dining room table onto the front lawn. That was our boat. And the message that we pushed out with our boat was, we are still people of hospitality, and we want to have our family meals in the within the vision of our neighbours, so that then they could see that they're not alone and they're not isolated, and that we are still neighbours. Well, this evolved, and after a time, we were allowed to do some exercise together and things, and so some of our neighbours, we started this mountain biking group. We started mountain biking, and I started to listen to the language that they were using about what's good for their soul is doing this stuff together. So Verity and I put out a message to our neighbours on the first Easter after COVID, and we said, come and resurrect your soul on our corner front lawn. Our neighbours started calling our front lawn the corner bar, because we're just like a stone throw away from the pub, but it was more fun to come to our place than it was to go to the pub, because we have all kinds of spiritual conversations on our front lawn with our neighbours. And so we had so many families come to our Easter celebration Sunday afternoon at the corner bar that I don't think our house really coped. Just so many people coming to our house and wanting to be part of connection. Well, there was all kinds of things that were happening on this front lawn, and one of the things that stood out to me was when one of my mountain biking mates came up alongside me and said, this, I won't use all the expletives that he uses, is Jesus you talk about? I reckon he'd even hang out with me. And I said to Verity, that's why we do this. That's why we do this thing on our front lawn. And then it was 6 months later, his mum passed away, and there's a long story about the disconnection in the family, and they didn't have a funeral. And he came to our front lawn and he said, I never had a funeral. And I said, well, is it okay? The pastor and me is saying, let's call some neighbours, let's gather around the fire on the front lawn and let's have an impromptu funeral service here for Mum. And we had a little prayer and we told some stories about Mum. These are the kinds of life-giving stories of hope that emerge when you respond to the call to push your boat out into the deep, into the places where you don't want to go or feel like going. This was our invitation to put out into a place of discomfort where Jesus was calling us to catch people with good news. What I love about the story of Jesus at the Lake of Galilee is that he meets people where they are without even being invited. Not only that, but he shows up in the ordinary places of ordinary people doing ordinary things. And in the case of these fishermen, Jesus shows up at work. And there's a challenging scenario for us to consider here because Jesus asks would-be followers to do something that they don't feel like doing, or, more to the point, something that maybe they don't feel equipped to do. And I wonder, have any of you ever felt like that? Being called to do something you don't feel equipped to do, or being called to do something you just don't feel like doing. We don't want to admit it, but Jesus, I don't really feel like doing that. We can often have thoughts such as, God only uses certain people with certain skills and capabilities, and I'm not that. Well, the intent of telling this story is for the listener to notice that the first of Jesus' disciples are not learned theological scholars. Quite the opposite. They're normal everyday people doing normal everyday things. And here's why this part is important, because God's agenda is to work through everyday people, to reach into the everyday activities of the human experience, so that those whom God calls may signpost the works of God's kingdom. And here's the other thing to note. These fishermen, they've been working at the family trade for as long as they can remember, probably passed down through generations, and they know their work. And in this instance, they've been working all night with no reward. And after slaving away with nothing to show for it, they're washing out their extremely heavy nets. And I can imagine that all they wanted to do was pack up. They just needed some rest. They wanted to go to bed. And I wonder if you've ever felt like that. I have. I've felt tired in ministry. You know, I've been in ministry for more than half my life with Churches of Christ. For more than 25 years, I've been in ministry and had lots of training and experience under what seemed in the late 90s of predictable atmosphere, a predictable conditions where we can kind of predict this is how the church should be and this is what we need to do, and we need to tweak that, we need to tweak that, we need to bring these skills, and we'll make the church flourish. Well, friends, we're not in predictable times anymore. Just someone mentioned the news before, and you can see how disruptive things are in our world. You know, I was trained in an environment that no longer exists. I've needed to shift my focus from knowing what I'm capable of and what my skills are to more and more looking to the extraordinary possibilities of what God can do. What I'm not trained for that God can do through me. If only I listen and respond. So Jesus says to Peter, push out into the deep water and let down your nets. But I don't feel like it, Jesus. I don't feel equipped right now. I don't feel like I've got the time or the energy right now. But as the story goes, they listen to Jesus. They do what he asks. They fill their nets. And the example of doing what Jesus asks is such a dramatic outcome that they realize that they cannot do this task by themselves. And so here's the lesson we learn about being a disciple of Jesus. When we listen and we hear God call us to push out into the deep, it really does take a good measure of faith for us to respond. Witnessing miraculous activities of what God can do in spite of us, in spite of our skills, in spite of our experience, that's a humbling experience in itself. We realize that God is doing the ministry, not us. And those who are called by Jesus are invited to participate in God's kingdom work with others. That is, we live by Jesus' teachings and we call others to do the same. And the call of the kingdom requires a reversal of priorities. We can go to the next slide. When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and they followed him. What are you holding on to that Jesus is calling you to let go of, to leave behind, so that you can faithfully follow? You know, I've had to let go of lots of things. I don't know about you, but I've had to let go of lots of things. And one of the very small examples of something I had to let go of was I wanted to turn our corner bar into a church plant. I know, radical, right? Who'd do such a thing? And my wife was kind of, don't ruin it by kind of imposing something on it of what it's not. But we're having lots of these faith conversations and people are talking about Jesus and I want to make it a bit more structured and do all this thing. Well, I had a little meeting with some of the neighbours and the decision was not to go with my idea. So I had to let it go. Well, I was travelling in one of our country churches and my mountain bike group, we've got a little WhatsApp group, right? And it just comes up on my phone, all these messages coming up on my phone on a Sunday morning before I'm about to preach out at Berry Church of Christ. And it says, I'm inviting you to a Sunday service. Now, there's about 20 guys in our group. And I'm like, who's inviting me to a Sunday service? And I said, oh, sorry, guys, I'm out at the Riverland. I'm not able to attend. This is curious. And they said, well, we can't have a Sunday service without the pastor. Oh, what's going on here? And then I found out Sunday service is where you bring all your mountain bikes together and you service your bikes. But they had all these jokes about, but we still need the pastor for the Sunday service. And who's going to give the message? And then they're joking about who's going to give the message, or I'm not going to give the message. It was a great play on words, but I found that when I was able to let something go and hand it back over to God and say, God, what will you do with this? The guys that keep inviting me back, and I've been to the Sunday service and we have conversations of faith, there's these fantastic opportunities to minister to people. We have to catch people with good news. And what's the good news? It's a good thing we've got a jingle for that. Let me restate Paul's plea to the church. If we get the next slide up. And what he wants to remind us of the good news we've received. And by this good news, we've been saved, that Christ lived, Christ died. On the third day, he was raised again. And because of this, we live. That's our jingle. And that's the chorus of the jingle that we hope rings in the minds of the people that we catch, the people who orbit in our worlds. If we go to the next slide, every good jingle has a bridge and a verse, right? So now that Paul has reiterated to the Corinthian church, this is how you speak your faith. I've kind of put it in a way that might be transferable for you very simplistically. So first of all, we've got the chorus, and our chorus for Verity and I is the rhythm that we live in our neighbourhood. We've actually got a corner bar happening this Saturday where we've got a new neighbour who's moved in. So we said, everyone come to the corner bar, neighbours come, we're going to welcome our new neighbour. So we do this sort of stuff all the time. But here's the bridge to the jingle. Paul proclaims the reality of Christ's resurrection and the experience of all whom he appeared to. And so we recall the memory of the saints who have gone before us, the eyewitness accounts and the experiences of others. That's how we give language to the jingle. And then the most important part is the main verse. And for Paul, he weaves his own story into the jingle. You see, the jingle that will ring in people's ears most powerfully is your testimony. So Paul says to the Corinthian church, this is the person that I was. Here's how Christ entered into my life. This is what I had to let go of. Here's how God now reshapes or transforms my life. And here's the hope that I now have. It's actually something that should roll off the tongues of all of us who've been in the church for a long time, because we rehearse this every time we come together. We've been rehearsing our jingles in song, haven't we? We do this all the time. Actually, I did preach this at another church. That's why Graham invited me to come. This is the gift of technology. He saw a video stream of me preaching somewhere else. And at that church, they actually got up after the service. I'm not putting pressure on the musicians, but they put this to a song. And we sang it as our benediction. How good's that? You don't have to do that. I'm not putting pressure on you. What I'm saying is, Paul's given us the script in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-11. I've just picked this out of those verses. He's given us the script. If you want to know how to talk to people about Jesus, know your own story. Know your own story. And know the Jesus story. Paul articulates his own saga and he ties it into the collective story of Christ's death and resurrection. And for all of us, that'll be different, because at some point in our lives, we had a moment, we had a aha, where the penny dropped and we realised Jesus Christ is our Lord and Saviour. We had that moment because there was someone in our life, a minister, a friend, an elder, a leader in the church, a parent, had shared the story with us. You hear what I'm saying? This is our responsibility. So we're part of the Allgate Church of Christ, and I'm very grateful to be part of a church where my kids, who are now 15, 13 and 11, have a community of saints around them who share the story. Each of my kids has a mentor who is like a grandparent figure in their lives, and 2 of my kids have been baptised, and the other one's made the decision to be baptised because of the collective story that the community of faith is sharing with them. That's what I'm grateful for. Each of us owes our testimony to the faithful witness of someone who pushed out into the deep and said, yes, I'll follow you, Jesus. I will catch people for your kingdom. Each of us is indebted to someone who shared a story and carried the faith from a memory to a lived experience in our lives. Our catchy jingle, when lived, it transforms lives. And dare we do any less for those who are looking to us for a story of hope. Amen. Our loving God, we thank you for